This demonstration goes through the steps of the Postman Quick Start for API Miner. It assumes you already have Postman installed. If not, refer to the Postman documentation for your operating system. All of the steps are in the API Miner documentation, so you can always refer to the docs for further details on any of these steps. To get API Miner set up in Postman, we'll first download the API specification from the documentation here, called Download Swagger 2.0 Specification. Save it somewhere on your computer so you can access it from Postman. Then, open Postman. I'm using the two-pane view, but that's just a matter of preference. You can use either one. To import the API Miner spec into Postman, click the Import button. Then choose Files. Find a downloaded YAML spec, and then open it. This will add the API Miner collection to Postman on the left. There are two small changes needed before you can start actually making API calls. First, edit the API Miner collection. Go to the Authorization tab. Change the authorization type token to bearer token. And then enter the variable token in the field. Variables in Postman are entered using two curly braces, so like on the screen, you'll enter open curly, token, close curly, close curly. And finally, click Update. And secondly, we'll add an environment for the Blockwell Spout server. To add a Postman environment, click the gear icon in the top right corner. This will open the Manage Environment screen. Click Add to add a new environment. We'll call it Blockwell Spout. The values for these are in the API Miner documentation Quick Start for Postman. Here. So for host, it is spout.apiminer.com. For token, you'll enter your access token for API Miner. And for contract ID, we'll use the ID here, which is the ID for the pump token on the Blockwell Spout network. Finally, after you've added the three values, click Add. Close the Manage Environment screen and make sure that the Blockwell Spout environment is selected in the top right. Now you're good to go. You can start making API calls. So first off, let's start by listing our Ethereum accounts. We should already have one created for us automatically. Here in the API Miner collection, find the Accounts folder, open the List Accounts endpoint, and click Send. The response shows one account, our default Ethereum account. Next, we'll get some pump tokens to our account. Find the contract send call endpoint under the contracts folder here. We want to call the token minting function, so click parameters and change the method value to be mint. And for the body, find the sample body in the documentation, copy it over to Postman, and then change the address placeholder token to match your account address that we got from the list accounts endpoint in our first step. And then hit send. The response shows us the ID of the transaction, but not the actual result, because the Ethereum network, the transactions can take anywhere from a few seconds to minutes to complete. On the Blockwell network, it usually takes about 8 to 12 seconds for a transaction to go from being submitted to being fully completed. But in order to check for the status of the transaction, let's copy the ID and then find the transactions folder and the get a transaction endpoint. Under parameters, change the ID value to the ID of the transaction from the previous step and click send. Here the response shows a status of completed, and that does mean successfully completed as well. If it had failed, it would say status of error, and the payload would include an error message as well. And here's also the transaction hash and some timestamps for when the transaction was processed, submitted, or created, submitted, and when it finally completed. Okay, so we know that the transaction completed, but let's just double check our token balance to make sure that we actually got tokens. So over here, under the tokens folder, find the default account balance endpoint. There's no parameter changes. It shall just hit send. And we see that we have the 100 tokens that we minted before with the 18 decimals. Okay, so next let's create a second Ethereum account. Find the accounts folder. This time select create account. And this one also needs no parameter, just click send. And here we have a second Ethereum account. You'll notice that this one says default account false, which means that this account is not our default Ethereum account. In practice, what that means is that if we want to use this account for sending transactions, we'll have to specify that in the request body, which we'll look at later in this demonstration. But right now, let's transfer some of that 100 tokens that we got on our first account to this second account. So first, under the tokens folder, find the transfer tokens endpoint. It's worth noting that you could also use the contract send call to make a transfer call on the contract directly, but the tokens endpoint, the transfer tokens endpoint, is just a little convenience that makes it simpler to use. So over here in the body, replace the to address with the account you created in the previous step. So copy the address to here. And the value should already be 1 token. So just hit send. And like before, we get a transaction ID. We could check the status of the transaction like before, but we'll skip straight to just checking the balance of the second account. So again, make sure you have the second account's address copied. In the tokens folder, find the token balance endpoint. And in the parameters, change the address to the second account's address and click send. And here we see 1 token with 18 decimals. Okay, as the last step, let's send tokens back from the second account to the default account. Let's say we'll send half of the tokens back. So let's go back to the transfer tokens. And this time, we'll add a from address to the payload, to the body. And the from should be the second account's address. And 2 is the first account address. And since this is currently 1 token, replace this with a 5. That should make it half of a token. And hit send. There you go. Now you could check the transfer status again, or the transaction status, and check the balances to make sure that it happened correctly. As you can see, there are many more endpoints you can explore in similar fashion, and just refer to the API documentation for details on the different endpoints. Thank you for watching.